This is the Commodore 128, and it is my favorite home computer of the 8-bit era. Hi, I'm Matt D'Amico, and welcome to episode 2 of Retro Bits. In this episode, we'll take a look at why the Commodore 128 was such a unique and special machine.
To match the higher intelligence of the new Commodore 128, an Apple IIc would have to add 3 more 2Cs to expand to 512K, an extra keypad, 30 block graphics sets, color sprites, 2 more voices, 4 instruments, a cartridge port, a joystick port, and a Commodore 64. Commodore 128 personal computer, a higher intelligence at a lower price.
I'm not going to talk about the history or the technical specs of the machine because there are already great videos out there that cover this in detail. Instead, I'd like to show you how I used the machine back in the day and what it could do that set it apart from its 8-bit peers. This is my new-to-me 128. Sadly, I sold my original machine from back in the day along with some very rare hardware in order to fund my first 386 PC. I recently picked this example up locally from a Craigslist seller, and it appears to be a one-owner, basement-kept machine with minimal wear or discoloration due to UV light. A quick cleaning of the keyboard, keys, and case, along with replacing a couple damaged but functional ceramic caps, was all it took to make it look good as new. Getting inside couldn't be any easier. There are only 6 screws that separate the top and bottom halves. In order to separate the 2 halves, disconnect the power LED wire on the left-hand side of the board, and optionally the keyboard connector on the right. As delivered, an RF shield that doubles as a heatsink covers the entire system board. I chose to leave it out due to the many tabs and screws that had to be removed every time I wanted to work on the machine. Here, you can see the dual 8502 and Z80 CPUs, as well as the VDC and VIC display chips. Heatsinks were added to each of the chips that were previously cooled by the RF shield. Jiffy DOS ROMs have been installed, along with a switch to select the original kernel if desired. Jiffy DOS is one of the most significant period-correct upgrades you can add to your 64 or 128, and I intend to dedicate an entire video to covering its benefits. Last but not least, a Saruman 64K RAM upgrade has been installed that gives this flat 128 the same video capabilities of the later 128D models. So, what makes this machine special? Well, to start off, just look at it. This machine looks fantastic. Gone are the chunky proportions and earthy palettes of yesteryear, as we have now entered squarely into the beige period. In 1985, this design was properly modern, and it still holds up today. It also sports a significantly improved keyboard from previous models. Now, to address the elephant in the room. Most people did buy these for their C64 compatibility. So yes, the 128 benefits from the best of the C64 world, including full backward compatibility and a massive library of existing software. But it could do much more than just run 64 software. In fact, the 128 could run 4 different operating systems. In addition to 64 mode, it had a new 128 mode that doubled the speed of the 6502-based processor to 2 MHz, and utilized the new VDC chip to display crisp 80-column text and graphics on an RGB monitor. Another benefit was that Commodore finally fixed the crippling IEC drive performance introduced with the VIC-20 by adding a high-speed burst mode to the new 1571 and 1581 drives. 128 mode also benefited from an updated version of Microsoft Basic 7 that added enhanced disk, graphics, and sound functions along with a built-in machine language monitor. The third official operating system that the 128 supported was CP/M, the direct predecessor to DOS. CP/M was popular in the 70s for business and had many existing applications that the 128 could run natively using its second CPU, a Zilog Z80. In theory, one could bring home application software and save data from their Osborne or K-Pro machine at work and run it on their 128 at home. In practice, however, CP/M ran very slowly on the Commodore, and the industry had already moved on to IBM PCs and DOS by the introduction of the system, so it was never a big selling point. Myself, I never touched CP/M. What was a teenager going to do with text-based business applications when I could do all my homework in glorious what you see is what you get in GEOS? More on that later. Now we get to the good stuff. Perhaps my favorite thing about the 128 was that it supported full IBM ANSI character graphics in 80-column mode. What this meant was that the IBM and Amiga-based BBSs, which really were the bulk of the boards available by the late 80s and early 90s, were no longer off limits. This opened up a whole new world of message boards, multi-node chat, and door games that were previously inaccessible to 40-column users. Now, to be fair, the 64 had software like Novaterm that attempted to emulate 80 columns with the VIC-2, but even with a proper monitor and split Lumichroma video, these were sure to hurt your eyes in short order. One of the quintessential pieces of software for the 128 was Desterm, written by Matthew Desmond in 1989. It featured a powerful user interface, support for X, Y, and Z modem file transfers, high-speed serial devices up to 57K, RAM expansions, interactive buffer editor, and much more. In a time when PC compatibles were starting to take over the market, Desterm gave those of us still clinging to our 8-bit micros a powerful communication tool that put us on equal footing with those superior platforms. Speaking of superior platforms, let's turn our attention to the fourth operating system on the 128. GEOS, or GEOS, the Graphic Environment Operating System by Berkeley Softworks. GEOS became the de facto standard GUI-based OS for the Commodore and Apple II 8-bits. It brought the capabilities of these machines into the next generation era with mouse-driven controls, what you see is what you get word processing, desktop publishing, spreadsheet software, and much more. One reason it became so ubiquitous is that Commodore began bundling GEOS for free with the 64C. Additionally, there were dozens of official and third-party applications available, and hundreds, if not thousands, of free drivers, fonts, applications, games, utilities, etc. available for download from BBSs and the Quantum Link online service. So why use a 128 when a 64 came with GEOS for free? For starters, the 8502 CPU in the 128 runs twice as fast as the 64. The high-resolution VDC graphics available on the 128 are sharp and clear. Those without an RGBI display can still run the 128 in 40-column mode on a TV, but the difference is immediately evident, and the VIC chip cannot operate when the CPU is clocked at 2 MHz. If GEOS has a party piece, it's the ability to make use of expanded systems. Snap in one of several available RAM expansion units, and GEOS can operate from a RAM disk at blazing speeds. Watch how quickly this system boots and launches an application with GEOS pre-positioned in this Commodore 512K REU. And if that's not enough, the eagle-eyed among you may have spotted this empty socket earlier. When populated, an option ROM allows for GEOS to be loaded straight from the chip, much like an Amiga or Atari ST. Modern updates include a variety of desktop replacements, new hardware support, performance enhancements, as well as complete, standalone third-party replacements, such as Wheels 128. Now I've covered productivity, but how about games? Well, the answer's a mixed bag. On the upside, the 128 can run almost every title in the C64 software library. That said, enhanced 128 versions of games were few and far between due to developers wanting to maintain compatibility with existing hardware and the fact that the new VDC chip wasn't well suited to games due to its lack of hardware sprites and raster interrupts. There were some great demos that took advantage of the VDC high resolution, 16 colors, and blitter capabilities though. One trick game developers came up with was the ability to switch the 8502 between 1 and 2 MHz modes when the VIC chip was between raster lines. This technique yielded a 30% bump in compute power when in 64 mode, which allowed certain games to run better on the 128, such as this Super Mario Bros. Port released in 2019. Well, that all sounds great, but how about shortcomings? Well, we already talked about the poor CPM performance, as well as the VIC and VDC chip limitations. So why wasn't this machine as successful as its little brother? For starters, the 128 was released at the very tail end of the 8-bit home computer era. The Amiga, Atari ST, and Intel 386 had just been released in the same year. The NES had just landed on North American shores and was eating away market share for C64 games. Also, you needed a special monitor to take full advantage of the system. Oh, and you couldn't stack a monitor on it. So, to recap, what made the Commodore 128 a unique and amazing 8-bit home computer? 2 CPUs, 2 video chips, 4 operating systems, twice the speed with enhanced disk performance, full backward compatibility, a modern design with enhanced keyboard, 80 columns, ANSI support, and RGB graphics.
The Commodore 128, on balance, it's the one you should choose.
Have your own Commodore 128 story to share? Think there was a better 8-bit home computer? Let us know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Retro Bits.